I woke up to find my keys gone. The locks changed. Through the curtain, I saw strangers packing my life into boxes. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone as I called her. Clara. My daughter. The phone rang and rang, each tone stabbing deeper into my chest like a knife twisting in a wound that was already bleeding. No answer. Just that cold, mechanical voicemail greeting, the same voice that used to call me Mama and beg for bedtime stories. Then the text came through. For words that shattered what was left of my world. It's nothing personal, Mom. Nothing personal? Nothing personal? When you steal your mother's home, when you rip away the walls that held 43 years of marriage, the floors where you took your first steps, the kitchen where I cooked your favorite meals when you were sick. When you erase every memory, every photograph, every piece of your father who isn't here to protect us anymore, nothing personal. I stood there in my nightgown, barefoot on the concrete steps of what used to be my porch, watching strangers carry away pieces of my soul in cardboard boxes. The morning air cut through me like ice, but the cold outside was nothing compared to the Arctic wasteland that used to be my heart. My daughter, my only child, the baby I held through countless fevered nights, the little girl I taught to ride a bicycle, the woman I welcomed back into my home when her marriage fell apart, had just thrown me away like garbage. But she didn't know. God help me, she didn't know that inside that safe she thought was empty, I left something that would change everything. Something that would teach her that a mother's love might be patient, might be forgiving, might endure more betrayal than any heart should bear, but it never, ever forgets how to fight back. Like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from, because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about what happens when silence learns how to speak, when patience transforms into power, and when a mother's broken heart remembers that sometimes love has to wear armor. Let me take you back to before the nightmare began, to when my world still made sense. 6 months earlier, my house was filled with morning sunlight streaming through the lace curtains David had helped me hang 20 years ago. The walls were covered with photographs. Our wedding day, Clara's first steps, family vacations to the lake, Christmas mornings where joy was as abundant as wrapping paper scattered across the hardwood floors. I was 68 years old and had been living alone since David passed 3 years ago. The silence in the house had become my companion, broken only by the tick of his grandfather clock and the gentle hum of memories that lived in every corner. I missed him with an ache that never faded, but I had learned to carry that grief like a familiar weight, heavy but manageable. Then Clara came home. My beautiful daughter, 34 years old and freshly divorced, standing on my doorstep with tears in her eyes and suitcases at her feet. Mom, she said, and her voice was the same little girl voice that used to call for me in the middle of the night when storms scared her. Can I come home? Just until I get back on my feet. My heart broke for her. Her marriage to Marcus had been troubled for years. I'd seen the way he dismissed her dreams, the way her light dimmed a little more each time I visited them. When she told me they were divorcing, part of me was relieved. She deserved better than a man who made her feel small. Of course, sweetheart, I said, pulling her into my arms like she was 5 years old again. This is your home. It will always be your home. Those first few weeks were like a gift I hadn't dared to pray for. Clara helped me tend my garden. We cooked dinner together every night, and we'd sit on the porch swing David had built, talking about everything and nothing. She seemed so grateful, so loving. Mom, you shouldn't be handling all these bills and documents by yourself, she said one evening, her hand gentle on my shoulder. Let me help you. I'm good with paperwork, you know that. Let me take care of the boring stuff so you can just enjoy your home. It seemed so reasonable. So caring. Clara had always been organized, detail-oriented. She'd studied business in college, worked in accounting before her marriage. When she offered to streamline my finances, to help me organize my important papers, to make sure everything was properly set up for the future, it felt like such a blessing. How could I have known I was signing away my life one document at a time? The changes started small. Mom, these locks are so old. What if someone breaks in? Let me get you some new ones, much more secure. New locks appeared overnight. She handed me shiny new keys with such pride, like she was giving me a gift instead of creating my prison. Mom, this bank is so inconvenient for you. Let me set up accounts somewhere closer. New bank statements started arriving. She explained everything so patiently, so lovingly. I trusted her completely because she was my daughter, because I loved her, because the thought that she might be stealing my life from under my feet was so impossible that my mind couldn't even form the words. Mom, we should update your address on all these accounts. You know, in case something happens. Something was happening, all right. Something terrible and deliberate and calculated. But I was blind to it, deafened by my love for her, paralyzed by my desperate gratitude that I wasn't alone anymore. The sweet daughter who helped me in the garden slowly transformed into someone I barely recognized. Her voice grew sharper when she spoke to me. Her patience thin like ice before a spring thaw. She started talking about my house instead of our house, about my property instead of Mom's property. When I questioned these little slips, she'd laugh and kiss my forehead. Oh, Mom, you know what I meant. I just feel so at home here, so grateful you're letting me stay. You're the best mother in the world. And I'd melt, because what mother doesn't want to hear those words? What mother doesn't want to believe that her child loves her, needs her, values her? I was so hungry for love, so desperate not to be alone again, that I fed myself on crumbs and called it a feast. The morning everything changed started like any other. I woke up in my bedroom, the same bedroom where David and I had shared 43 years of marriage, where we'd whispered our dreams and fears into the darkness, where I'd held his hand as cancer stole him away from me one breath at a time. The sun was streaming through the windows, and for just a moment, in that space between sleep and waking, I forgot that anything was wrong. Then I heard the truck outside, the shouting, the sound of furniture scraping against the floor, voices I didn't recognize giving orders in my own home. I stumbled to the window and looked out at a scene from my worst nightmare. Strange men were loading my life into boxes and carrying those boxes to a moving truck. My wedding chest, the one David's grandmother had given us, was being lifted by two men who handled it like it was nothing more than cargo. My husband's favorite reading chair, the one where he'd fallen asleep countless nights with a book in his lap, was being wrapped in plastic and shoved into the back of the truck. What's happening? I whispered to the empty room, but my heart already knew. The knowledge was sitting in my stomach like a stone, cold and heavy and undeniable. I ran to my bedroom door and turned the handle. Locked. From the outside. I was locked inside my own bedroom like a prisoner, like someone dangerous who needed to be contained. The humiliation burned hotter than panic. I pounded on the door until my fists were raw, screaming for Clara, screaming for answers, screaming for mercy. No one came. I called her phone with shaking fingers. Ring, ring, ring. Each unanswered ring was another nail in the coffin of my understanding. She wasn't going to answer. She was never going to answer again. Then my phone buzzed with that text message, those 4 words that killed whatever hope I had left. It's nothing personal, Mom. I read those words over and over until they burned themselves into my retinas. Nothing personal. As if stealing your mother's home, as if destroying the sanctuary where she mourned her husband and treasured her memories, as if betraying the woman who gave you life and raised you with every ounce of love in her body. As if that could ever be anything but personal. I sank to the floor and wept until I thought my chest would crack open. Outside my locked bedroom door, I could hear strangers walking through my house, commenting on my belongings like they were pricing items at a garage sale. This furniture is pretty old. The kitchen appliances need updating. At least the bones of the house are good. They were appraising my life, my memories, my heart, and finding them adequate but unremarkable. When they finally unlocked my door, I stumbled out to find my house stripped bare. 43 years of marriage, 34 years of motherhood, 68 years of living, all of it gone. The walls looked naked without our family photographs. The living room echoed without David's furniture. Even my kitchen looked foreign with all my dishes, my cookbooks, my special utensils packed away. A woman in a business suit was waiting for me with papers to sign. "Mrs. Anderson," she said with practiced sympathy, "I understand this is difficult, but you need to vacate the premises by 5 o'clock today. The new owner has been very patient, but she has the right to take possession now." New owner. Clara was the new owner of my home. Somehow, while I'd been trusting her with my paperwork and my finances and my future, she'd been stealing my present. I stood there in my nightgown, holding my purse and a single suitcase, all I'd been allowed to keep, and I looked around at the empty shell of what used to be my life. The woman in the suit kept glancing at her watch. The movers were loading the last of my belongings. And somewhere, my daughter was probably celebrating her victory. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, but the question wasn't really directed at anyone in particular. It was just the cry of a lost soul, wandering in a wilderness I couldn't understand. The rain started as I walked down my own driveway for what I thought might be the last time. Each drop felt like a tear the sky was crying on my behalf. I stood at the curb, looking back at my house, at Clara's house now, and I felt something inside me die. Not just hope, but innocence. The belief that love protects us from harm. The faith that family means safety. I was homeless at 68 years old, betrayed by the person I loved most in the world, stripped of everything I'd built with my husband, abandoned by the child I'd sacrificed everything to raise. And the worst part, the part that made me want to lie down in the rain and never get up again, was that she'd made it sound like kindness. Like she was doing me a favor. Like stealing my life was somehow an act of love. My friend Margaret took me in that first night, bless her heart. She lived in a tiny apartment across town and gave me her couch without asking a single question about how I'd ended up there. But I could see the pity in her eyes, and that almost hurt worse than everything else. I'd become the kind of person people felt sorry for, the poor old woman whose own daughter had thrown her away. I lay on that couch staring at the ceiling, and the humiliation burned through me like acid. During the day, I could barely function. I'd sit by Margaret's window and just stare at nothing, trying to make sense of what had happened. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so blind, so trusting, so foolish? But the nights were worse. The nights were when the rage came. It would start as a whisper in the darkness, a voice that sounded like my own but stronger, angrier, more determined. "You don't have to take this. You don't have to let her win. You don't have to disappear quietly just because she wants you to." I'd try to push those thoughts away, try to find forgiveness in my heart, because that's what good mothers do, isn't it? Good mothers forgive their children no matter what. Good mothers turn the other cheek. Good mothers love unconditionally, even when that love is met with betrayal. But as the days turned into weeks, as I called Clara over and over again only to be sent straight to voicemail, as I reached out to relatives who suddenly seemed to have misplaced my phone number, the whisper grew louder. It grew teeth. It grew claws. It grew into something that was tired of being quiet, tired of being good, tired of being the victim in someone else's story. My family, my own relatives, had taken Clara's side without even hearing mine. "Give her time," my sister said when I finally reached her. "You know how emotional divorces can be. She's probably just overwhelmed. She'll come around." Come around? Come around from what? From stealing my house? From changing my locks? From throwing me out like garbage? But somehow I was the one who needed to be patient. I was the one who needed to understand. I was the one who needed to give her space to work through whatever justified destroying my life. Maybe, my brother suggested gently, "This is for the best. You're getting older, Mom. Maybe Clara's just worried about you living alone in that big house. Maybe she's trying to help you transition to something more manageable." Transition. Like my betrayal was just another life stage I needed to gracefully accept. Like being homeless and heartbroken was character development. Like my daughter's theft was actually wisdom disguised as cruelty. But there was one thing none of them knew. One thing Clara didn't know. One secret that had been waiting in the walls of my house for exactly this moment. The safe. I'd forgotten about it myself until the third sleepless night on Margaret's couch. I was lying there in the darkness, trying to inventory what I'd lost, when the memory hit me like lightning. David installing a wall safe in our bedroom closet during our 10th year of marriage. "If anyone ever betrays you, Mary," he'd said, his hands gentle on my face, "if anyone ever tries to take what's ours, that safe will protect what's right." We'd laughed about it then. What betrayal could we possibly face? We were young and in love and surrounded by family who adored us. The safe had seemed like David's paranoia, his need to protect me from threats that didn't exist. But David had always been wiser than me. He'd seen something I couldn't see, or maybe he just loved me enough to prepare for possibilities I was too innocent to imagine. Inside that safe were documents Clara had never found, the original house deed in my name alone, inherited from my parents before I ever married David. A notarized will David had written and witnessed, leaving everything to me with clear instructions that the house was to remain mine until my death. And most damning of all, a recording I'd made months earlier when I'd first started to feel suspicious about some of Clara's help with my paperwork. I'd been subtle about it, asking her seemingly innocent questions about what she was doing, why she needed my signature on so many documents, what all these account changes were really about. She'd thought I was just a confused old woman, so she'd explained everything with the patience you'd use on a child. She'd even laughed about how easy it had been to protect my assets and streamline my affairs. She'd confessed to everything, recorded in her own voice, preserved on my phone like evidence waiting for its day in court. My heart was pounding as I remembered that recording, as I realized what I had. Clara thought she'd been so clever, but she'd left her fingerprints all over a crime she didn't even realize she'd confessed to. She'd thought the safe was empty because David had never told anyone about it except me. She'd stolen my house, but she hadn't found my weapons. The sadness that had been drowning me for weeks suddenly crystallized into something else. Something harder. Something that tasted like justice and felt like power. The grief was still there. God, it was still there, sharp and constant and soul-deep. But underneath it, growing like a seed in winter soil, was a determination that surprised me with its strength. My daughter had made a choice. She'd chosen greed over love, theft over honesty, cruelty over compassion. She'd looked at her grieving mother and seen an opportunity instead of a person who needed protection. She'd taken my trust and used it to destroy me. But she'd forgotten that mothers don't just create life. Sometimes we have to fight for it too. I sat up on Margaret's couch and felt something shift inside me, something that had been sleeping since David died. It was the part of me that had worked 2 jobs to put Clara through college, that had stayed up all night nursing her through childhood illnesses, that had stood between her and every hurt the world had tried to inflict. It was the mother bear who had been dormant but never dead. Clara had awakened something she didn't understand. She'd declared war on someone who had forgotten her own strength, but was about to remember it with devastating clarity. The next morning, I called David's old lawyer. Richard had been a friend of our family for 30 years, had handled our wills and property transfers, had been at David's funeral to make sure I understood my rights and protections. When his secretary said he could see me that afternoon, I put on the only nice dress I'd salvaged from my old life and walked into his office with my head held high. "Mary," Richard said, and his face was full of the kind of gentle concern that had become so familiar since David's death. "I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how difficult this must be for you." I sat across from his desk and placed my purse carefully in my lap. "Richard," I said, and my voice was steadier than I'd expected, "I need to know if my daughter legally owns my house." He pulled up files on his computer, his expression growing more troubled with each document he reviewed. "Mary, I don't understand." The deed transfers show Clara as the new owner, but these signatures. He looked up at me with confusion. Did you sign these documents? I signed a lot of documents, I said carefully. Clara was helping me organize my affairs. She said it was all routine paperwork, updating beneficiaries and streamlining accounts. I trusted her. Richard's jaw tightened as he studied the papers. Mary, some of these signatures look irregular. And the transfer of your primary residence to Clara was done without my knowledge or involvement, which is unusual given that I've handled all your family's property matters for decades. Did Clara recommend a different lawyer for these transactions? She said you were too expensive for simple paperwork, I admitted, feeling the shame burn hot in my cheeks. She said she'd found someone more affordable. More affordable, Richard repeated, and his tone was dangerous. Mary, transferring property isn't simple paperwork. It's one of the most complex legal processes there is, and it requires extensive documentation and verification. Who is this other lawyer? I pulled out the business card Clara had given me months ago. Richard glanced at it, and his expression darkened further. Mary, this man was disbarred last year for fraud. These documents may not be legal at all. Hope flickered in my chest like a candle in the wind. What does that mean? It means, Richard said slowly, that if these transfers were conducted illegally, they can be reversed. It means if Clara obtained your property through fraud, she doesn't actually own it. It means we might be able to get your house back. The room seemed to spin around me. For weeks, I'd believed that my daughter had outsmarted me, that she'd used my love and trust to legally steal my life. But if the theft wasn't legal, if the documents were forged or fraudulent, if Clara had broken actual laws instead of just breaking my heart, what do I need to do? I asked. Richard leaned forward, and for the first time since my nightmare began, I saw determination instead of pity in someone's eyes. We need to build a case. We need documentation, witnesses, evidence of fraud and elder abuse. Do you have anything that shows Clara's true intentions? Any record of her admitting what she was really doing? I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear or heartbreak. It was from anticipation. From the intoxicating possibility of justice. Actually, I said, I think I do. The recording was 18 minutes long. 18 minutes of my daughter explaining exactly how she'd helped me by gradually transferring my assets to her name, how she'd found a cooperative lawyer who didn't ask too many questions, how she'd been protecting my property from potential nursing home claims by making sure it was safely in her possession. Richard listened to the entire recording without saying a word. When it ended, he looked at me with something close to amazement. Mary, he said quietly, this is a confession. This is your daughter admitting to elder abuse, fraud, and theft. With this recording and the documentation I can gather about the illegal property transfers, we can not only get your house back, we can press criminal charges. Criminal charges. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd wanted justice, but I hadn't really thought about what justice might look like. Did I want my daughter arrested? Did I want her to go to jail? Did I want to destroy her life the way she'd tried to destroy mine? The answer came to me with startling clarity. I wanted her to understand that actions have consequences. I wanted her to learn that love and trust aren't infinite resources that can be abused without cost. I wanted her to face the truth of what she'd done, not hide behind excuses about doing what was best for me or protecting my interests. Most of all, I wanted her to know that she'd underestimated the woman who raised her. She'd seen a grieving widow and thought she'd found an easy target. She'd forgotten that I was also a mother who'd fought for her family every single day for 43 years. She was about to remember. We spent the next 8 weeks building our case in secret. Richard hired a private investigator who documented Clara's lifestyle changes, the expensive renovations to my house, the new car she'd bought, the vacation photos she'd been posting on social media. We gathered testimony from neighbors who'd witnessed the moving truck, from bank employees who remembered the account transfers, from the disbarred lawyer's former clients who'd been victims of similar schemes. Every piece of evidence felt like armor I was putting on, protection against the vulnerability that had made me such an easy target. I wasn't just preparing for court. I was rebuilding myself into someone who couldn't be victimized again. Clara, meanwhile, was living her best life in my house. Margaret showed me the photos Clara had posted online, my living room redecorated with trendy furniture, my kitchen renovated with expensive appliances, my garden redesigned with ornamental plants that required no care or attention. She'd erased every trace of David's presence, every hint that the house had ever been a home instead of just a piece of real estate. In one photo, she was hosting a dinner party in my dining room. The caption read, "So grateful for this fresh start in my beautiful new home." Sometimes the best thing you can do for family is make the hard decisions they can't make for themselves. Hashtag new beginnings, hashtag blessed, hashtag family first. Family first. She'd posted that with a straight face while I was sleeping on my friend's couch because my own daughter had made me homeless. But what hurt most was seeing how happy she looked. How free. How unburdened by guilt or shame or any recognition that she'd done something wrong. She'd convinced herself that stealing my life was actually an act of love, that betraying my trust was really wisdom, that throwing me away was somehow mercy. She genuinely believed she was the hero of this story. Richard filed our lawsuit on a Tuesday morning in November. Clara was served with papers while she was having coffee on my front porch, the porch where she'd once begged me to let her come home, where I'd welcomed her back with open arms and an open heart. According to the process server, she'd gone pale as she read the documents. She'd called me immediately, but I'd learned from her example. I didn't answer. I let her go to voicemail, let her experience the helplessness of reaching out to someone who'd decided you no longer existed. Her voicemail was 3 minutes of panic and denial. "Mom, what is this? What lawsuit? I don't understand what's happening. There must be some mistake. Can you please call me back? I'm worried about you. I think someone might be taking advantage of you, maybe that friend you're staying with. Please, Mom, we need to talk about this." Even facing a lawsuit, even confronted with evidence of her own crimes, her first instinct was to blame someone else, to paint herself as the victim, to suggest that I was being manipulated by people who actually cared about my welfare. I saved that voicemail. I wanted to remember how she sounded when the tables were turned, when she was the one who felt powerless and confused and abandoned. The court date was set for December 15th. 3 days before Clara's 35th birthday. She'd always been sentimental about birthdays, had thrown elaborate parties for herself every year since she was a teenager. This year, instead of cake and presents, she'd be explaining to a judge why she'd stolen her mother's home. The irony wasn't lost on me. 35 years earlier, I'd been in labor for 14 hours, bringing her into the world. I'd held her in my arms and promised her that I would love her unconditionally, protect her from harm, sacrifice anything necessary to give her a good life. I'd kept that promise for 34 years. Now, 3 days before her 35th birthday, I was going to teach her the most important lesson I'd ever given her, that love without respect is manipulation, that family doesn't mean you can abuse trust without consequences, and that sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who have to hold you accountable for your choices. The weeks leading up to court were surreal. Clara tried everything, showing up at Margaret's apartment, sending flowers with apology cards, having relatives call me with messages about forgiveness and family unity. She even had the audacity to suggest that we could work something out without involving lawyers and courts. "Mom," she said in one voicemail, her voice thick with tears that might have been genuine, "I know you're hurt, and I understand why. Maybe I didn't explain things clearly. Maybe I moved too fast. But everything I did was to protect you, to make sure you were taken care of. Can't we sit down and talk about this like family? Like family?" She wanted to talk like family after she'd treated me like a stranger. She wanted understanding after she'd shown me none. She wanted mercy after she'd given me cruelty. But I'd learned something important during those weeks of preparation. Mercy without justice isn't love, it's enabling. Forgiveness without accountability isn't healing, it's permission to do harm again. Clara needed to face consequences not because I wanted to hurt her, but because someone who could steal from their own mother was someone who hadn't learned the basic principles of human decency. My love for her, the real, deep, complicated love that comes from 34 years of motherhood, demanded that I stop her from becoming a person who could live with herself after committing such betrayal. The day of the court hearing arrived gray and cold, with the kind of December wind that cuts through even the warmest coat. I dressed carefully in the navy blue suit I'd worn to David's funeral, the one that made me feel dignified and strong. Margaret drove me to the courthouse, her hand squeezing mine as we walked up the steps. "You sure about this, Mary?" she asked one last time. "It's not too late to try to work things out privately." I looked at the courthouse steps, at the imposing building where justice lived, and I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since the morning my keys stopped working. "I'm sure," I said. "Some things can't be worked out privately. Some things require the truth to be spoken in public, where lies can't hide." Clara was already inside with her lawyer, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She'd aged in the months since she'd stolen my house. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, a tightness in her jaw that spoke of sleepless nights and growing desperation. When she saw me, she started to stand, started to approach me with her arms outstretched like she thought this was a reunion instead of a reckoning. I met her eyes calmly and shook my head once. She stopped moving, her arms falling to her sides, confusion and hurt flickering across her face. She was hurt. She was confused. She felt abandoned and betrayed. She didn't understand why the mother who'd always forgiven her before wasn't forgiving her now. Good. Now she knew how it felt. The judge was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed our case documents while the courtroom sat in silence, the only sound the whisper of pages turning and the tick of the wall clock. "This case," Judge Morrison said finally, "involves allegations of elder abuse, fraud, and illegal property transfer. Mrs. Anderson, you're claiming that your daughter obtained your house through deception and forged documents." Richard stood to present our case, but I asked him to let me speak first. I wanted Clara to hear this in my voice, to understand that this wasn't my lawyer's revenge, it was her mother's justice. "Your Honor," I said, standing slowly, feeling the weight of every one of my 68 years. 8 months ago, my daughter moved back into my home. She said she needed help getting back on her feet after her divorce. I welcomed her because I loved her, because she was my child, and because I was lonely after my husband died. I could see Clara's face in my peripheral vision, tears starting to stream down her cheeks. She knew what was coming. Over the following months, she gradually took control of my finances, my legal documents, and my property. She told me she was helping me organize my affairs, updating my beneficiaries, protecting my assets. I trusted her because she was my daughter, and because I believed that my child would never hurt me. My voice cracked on those last words, but I pushed through. This had to be said. This had to be heard. I discovered that while I was trusting her, she was stealing from me. She transferred my house, the home I'd shared with my husband for 43 years, the home where I'd raised her with love and sacrifice, into her name. She changed the locks. She had my belongings removed. She made me homeless in the house where I'd planned to live until I died. Judge Morrison's expression had grown increasingly stern as I spoke. She looked at Clara, who was openly sobbing now. "Ms. Anderson," she said to my daughter, "how do you respond to these allegations?" Clara's lawyer tried to speak for her, but she waved him off. She stood on shaking legs and faced the judge with mascara running down her cheeks. "Your Honor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I was trying to help her." She's getting older, and I was worried about her living alone in that big house. I thought if I could get the property transferred to my name, I could take better care of everything. I could make sure she was safe and protected. By making her homeless? Judge Morrison asked dryly. I never meant for her to be homeless, Clara said desperately. I was going to take care of her. I was going to make sure she had everything she needed. I just thought it would be easier if I was the legal owner, if I was the one making the decisions. Easier for whom? The judge asked. Clara's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She couldn't answer because the truth was too ugly to say out loud. Easier for her. Easier to control me, easier to spend my money, easier to live in my house without having to consider my wishes or feelings or rights. Richard played the recording then, Clara's own voice filling the courtroom as she explained exactly how she'd helped me by stealing my life. With each word, I watched my daughter shrink a little more, watched her realize that her crime had been captured in her own voice, preserved in her own words. When the recording ended, the courtroom was silent except for Clara's quiet sobs. Judge Morrison looked at the evidence, looked at Clara, looked at me. Ms. Anderson, she said to my daughter, you have committed elder abuse against your own mother. You have fraudulently obtained property that doesn't belong to you. You have used forged documents and illegal transfers to steal your mother's home. Clara was crying so hard she could barely breathe. I'm sorry, she choked out. I'm so sorry, Mom. I never meant. I didn't think. I'm sorry. Sorry. After months of silence, after refusing my calls, after leaving me homeless and heartbroken, after stealing my memories and my security and my sense of safety in the world, she was sorry. But sorry wasn't enough anymore. Sorry was what you said when you accidentally broke someone's favorite mug, not when you deliberately broke their heart and their life and their trust in the goodness of family love. Judge Morrison's ruling was swift and decisive. The property transfers were declared illegal and void. The house was returned to my name immediately. Clara was ordered to pay restitution for my legal fees and living expenses. She was placed on probation for elder abuse and fraud. Most importantly, she was ordered to have no contact with me for 1 full year unless I initiated it. For the first time in months, someone with authority had looked at what Clara did to me and called it what it was: abuse. Criminal behavior. Unacceptable treatment of a mother by her child. As we left the courthouse, Clara tried one last time to approach me. Mom, she called out, her voice desperate and broken, please. Can we talk? Can you please forgive me? I turned to face her one last time. She looked so young in that moment, so lost and frightened. For just a second, my mother's heart wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, to fix her hurt the way I'd been fixing her hurts since she was a baby. But then I remembered how I'd felt standing on my own porch with useless keys in my hand. I remembered the voicemail message that had shattered my heart. I remembered the months of silence, the humiliation, the nights spent crying on a friend's couch because my own daughter had thrown me away. Clara, I said quietly, I spent 34 years teaching you right from wrong. I thought I'd succeeded. But you chose to steal from me, to lie to me, to make me homeless and heartbroken. You chose to ignore everything I taught you about love and family and basic human decency. She was sobbing openly now, but I continued. You asked me to forgive you. Someday I might. But first, you need to forgive yourself for becoming someone who could hurt their mother this way. You need to figure out how you became a person who could sleep at night in a bed you stole from the woman who gave you life. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing on the courthouse steps with her broken apologies and her empty excuses. Margaret drove me home, to my real home, my legal home, the home that was mine again by court order and moral right. The key turned in the lock like it had never been changed, like the last 8 months had been a nightmare I was finally waking up from. The house was different now. Clara had redecorated extensively, removing most traces of David's presence and my personal history. But underneath her superficial changes, The bones of my home were still there. The walls still held 43 years of marriage. The floors still remembered my daughter's first steps. The kitchen still carried the echoes of family dinners and birthday celebrations and quiet conversations over morning coffee. I walked through each room slowly, reclaiming my space, remembering my life. In the bedroom, I went straight to the closet where David had installed our secret safe so many years ago. The wall looked exactly the same. Clara had never found it, never suspected it existed. I opened the safe one last time. It was empty now. All the documents had been used in court. All the weapons of justice had been deployed. But I left it open, like a mouth that had finally spoken its truth and no longer needed to hold secrets. That evening, I sat on my front porch swing as the sun set, wrapped in the quilt David's mother had made for our first anniversary. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. A few neighbors had stopped by during the day to welcome me home, to express their relief that justice had been served. "We always wondered what happened to you," Mrs. Chen from next door had said. "Clara told everyone you'd decided to move to a retirement community, but it seemed so sudden. We're glad you're back where you belong." Where I belong. In the house I'd shared with my husband, surrounded by memories of a life well lived, secure in the knowledge that my home was legally and morally mine. Not because someone had given it to me out of pity or convenience, but because I'd fought for it, reclaimed it, refused to let theft and betrayal be the end of my story. The anger that had sustained me through months of legal preparation was fading now, replaced by something deeper and more complex. I wasn't angry anymore. I was sad. Sad that my daughter had chosen greed over love. Sad that she'd thought so little of me that she'd believed I'd never fight back. Sad that she'd had to learn about consequences in a courtroom instead of learning about integrity at home. But underneath the sadness was something else. Pride. Pride that I'd found my strength again after losing it. Pride that I'd refused to be a victim. Pride that I'd taught my daughter the most important lesson I could give her, that actions have consequences, even when the person you hurt loves you unconditionally. Especially then. A car drove slowly past my house, slowing down as it approached. I recognized it as Clara's car, saw her pale face behind the windshield. She was checking on me, maybe hoping for some sign that reconciliation was possible, that forgiveness might be offered without accountability. I met her eyes through the windshield and nodded once, not in invitation, not in absolution, but in acknowledgement. "I saw you. I know you're there. I know you're hurting. But your pain doesn't erase my pain, and your regret doesn't undo your choices." She drove away without stopping. Over the following weeks, as I slowly returned to my normal life, people asked me the same question over and over. Will you ever forgive her? It's a complicated question. Forgiveness isn't a light switch you flip when someone apologizes. It's not a debt that gets canceled when the person who hurt you feels bad about it. Real forgiveness, the kind that heals instead of enabling, requires the person seeking it to truly understand what they've done and why it was wrong. Clara hadn't reached that understanding yet. She was still focused on how sorry she felt, how much she regretted getting caught, how difficult the consequences were for her. She hadn't yet grasped the fundamental truth that she'd stolen more than just my house. She'd stolen my sense of safety in the world, my trust in family love, my faith that the people closest to me would protect rather than prey on me. Until she understood that, until she could sit with the full weight of what she'd done without making excuses or blaming her divorce or claiming she'd been trying to help me, until then, forgiveness would just be permission to hurt me again. But here's what I learned during those months of fighting for my home and my dignity. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to make their wrong choices easy to live with. Sometimes love has to wear armor. Sometimes mercy has to demand justice first. I loved Clara enough to fight her when she was wrong. I loved her enough to refuse to enable her transformation into someone who could abuse her own mother and sleep soundly at night. I loved her enough to hope that facing real consequences might shock her back into the decent person I'd raised her to be. Maybe someday she'll do the hard work of understanding what she really did to me. Maybe someday she'll take responsibility without excuses, show remorse without expecting immediate forgiveness, rebuild trust through actions rather than words. Maybe someday we'll sit on this porch swing together, and she'll tell me how she learned to live with what she did, how she changed into someone who could never hurt another person the way she hurt me. If that day comes, I'll be ready to listen. But until it does, I'll be here in my home, legally, morally, completely mine, living my life with the dignity and security she tried to steal from me. The safe in my bedroom closet remains open, empty, but no longer secret. It served its purpose. It protected what was right when everything else failed. It held the truth until the truth could speak for itself. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and I'm missing David most intensely, I think about what he said when he installed that safe. If anyone ever betrays you, Mary, that safe will protect what's right. He'd been preparing for this moment even then, understanding something about love and protection that I was too innocent to grasp. Sometimes the people who love us most have to prepare us for betrayals we can't imagine, arms we never expect to need, strength we don't know we possess. Clara changed the locks to shut me out, but she only succeeded in locking herself away from Grace. She thought she was stealing my home, but what she really stole was her own place in the family she'd been born into. The locks have been changed again now, back to keys that work in my hands, in my home, in my life. And every morning when I wake up in the bedroom I shared with David for 43 years, in the house where I raised my daughter with every ounce of love I possessed, I remember that justice doesn't always come quickly. But it comes. Would you have forgiven her? Or would you have done what I did, stayed silent until the truth could speak for itself? Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next story proves once again, you can steal a house, but you can never steal a mother's wisdom. Some locks protect things. Others protect lessons. And sometimes, when everything you've built threatens to crumble around you, the most important lock is the one that protects your own sense of what's right and wrong, what's acceptable and what demands justice, what can be forgiven and what must be fought. My daughter thought she could steal my home. What she learned was that home isn't just a building you can transfer with forged papers and fake lawyers. Home is the place where your values live, where your dignity resides, where your strength waits patiently for the moment when you need it most. Clara took my house for 8 months. But she never took my home. That was always mine, and it always will be.